Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Mad and also at Movies TV Mad on Vero. Welcome to Tuesday's edition of the dceu Daily. And as from tomorrow evening, I will be in the UK for the next month and attempt to do these daily videos. But on today's show, we're going to talk about how Michael Keaton isn't the problem with the DC Extended Universe moving forward. And you hating on him is weird. It's weird because even if Michael Keaton isn't involved in the future of the DC Extended Universe, potentially Batfleck still wouldn't be there. But we don't know if Batfleck will no longer be involved. These are leaks. These are half-truths. Batfleck could still be involved, but he may not be. But as I've assured you, there will be another place for that Batman and for Snyder's DCEU vision and universe, and there's nothing to worry about. So we're going to start the show off talking about that. I'm going to read you a couple of Peacemaker reviews, and I'm really going to delve into Peacemaker. There's also a little article, and I found a little bit where the Hollywood Reporter are talking about DC turning the page with these upcoming DC Extended Universe movies as well. Plus, Matt Reeves' The Batman. It's the beginning of Earth 2, which is very exciting. It's a huge year to be a DC fan. Put the negativity to one side. If you're not feeling negative, that's okay, because I'm not feeling negative or worried. I'm excited. I think this is an ambitious thing that they're doing, you know, the reboot and the rebrand, but being able for it to be a multiverse so everyone is happy rather than just one set of fans being happy. For example, die-hard, you know, DC Comics fans haven't really been aimed at to be pleased as well. And I think this is something that Ann Sarnoff has been talking about as well. But let's talk about the hatred for Michael Keaton's Batman. Michael Keaton is not just an iconic Batman, he's an iconic actor. He's been around for years. He is a fucking legend. And people dumbly, stupidly attacking him doesn't make sense to me, because Michael Keaton isn't the reason. If Batfleck's gone after The Flash, he's not the reason. He's the solution. He's a solution to the problem of not having Batfleck. And Ben Affleck, if he's not involved after The Flash, is purely a Ben Affleck decision. Does that mean if Zack restores the Snyderverse, Ben will no longer be involved? No, of course he will be involved. He came back to do reshoots. He would come back for this. I think what Ben was saying in that interview about not wanting to be involved in IPs probably is that he doesn't want to be involved in this central multiverse universe anymore. He had an opportunity to be Batman, and he was going to make a Batman movie, which sounds amazing looking at the script, but it all went wrong. These things happen, and kind of the new leadership of the studio had a job to do. What do we do to make this a relevant franchise so everyone can come in and enjoy it? And of course, they've made some very, very tough decisions, some very unenviable decisions. It's been difficult, and we're going to see the fruition of these decisions this year with these, 5, 6 DC movies, including Super Pets, which is not part of the DCEU, and Batgirl on HBO Max, which is part of the DCEU. So for me, it's all very exciting, and Michael Keaton's involvement isn't a toxic thing, isn't kind of divisive. Michael Keaton was the first live-action movie Batman. A great Batman, an uncomplicated man. He doesn't lecture people on Twitter. He's a good man, right? And it's exciting that he's going to be in Batgirl. But maybe Ben Affleck will be in Batgirl. At this moment, they may both be in it. We know Keaton has been confirmed. Maybe Affleck is the surprise. He was a surprise, of course, in the first Suicide Squad movie. And what a beautiful surprise that is. So I'm not going to sit here and say definitely that Ben Affleck won't be involved going forward, because even though he said he doesn't want to kind of lead the line in, you know, IP movies, he could still cameo, as could Henry Cavill as well. We simply don't know enough. But I know enough to tell you, with or without Ben Affleck, Michael Keaton was always going to be a thing. And this is your proof. Michael Keaton and Ben Affleck, both Batmen, are both going to be in the Flash movie. Not one usurps the other. You know, Batfleck plays a huge role in the emotional character development of Barry Allen, Ezra Miller's The Flash character at the beginning of the movie. So you're probably talking about at least 20 minutes, half an hour of screen time at the very least, which is awesome. Now, when Flashpoint is fixed, if Batfleck isn't in the central universe anymore and he's kind of gone to another Earth, kind of another universe, an Elseworld, then of course that will be hard for people, but it doesn't mean you will never see him again. There's so much potential here if you let go of your hatred. I actually read a great tweet from someone. If the Flash leaks happen, you know, not to be true, will you admit you were wrong, or will you find something else to lose your shit about? And this was a Restore the Snyderverse fan, and I say well done to this person, because I think it was a fucking great tweet. People think by attacking the Flash movie and, you know, making it a problem and putting people off of it, that they can restore the Snyderverse in that way. You are not going to stop anything. Now, of course, if this Flash movie doesn't succeed, then there's no DC Extended Universe, is there? You know, you could still restore the Snyderverse. It's irrelevant what the central universe does. That's not about, you know, that's irrelevant to restoring the Snyderverse. So the hate on Michael Keaton, for me, is futile. And, you know, you're talking, when people seriously come out on a platform where millions of people are reading their tweets, whether they're followed or not, it seems dumb to hate on an icon who hasn't done anything to anyone. Has Michael Keaton said anything negative about Ben Affleck? No. Has Michael Keaton said anything negative about Zack Snyder? No. And I read a Snyder fan. Of course, I'm a Snyder DCEU fan as well. Let's not forget that, right? For the people at the back, crunching so loud on their popcorn they can't hear what I'm fucking saying. I'm a Snyder fan. So, you know, he hasn't said anything wrong. So, but I'm also a Michael Keaton fan. I'm an all-round DC fan. So I'm excited to see Michael back. And, you know, a lot of people have made something of his age as well. And that's interesting to me, because when you look at Michael, he looks about fucking, you know, 60 rather than nearly 70. So, and people keep on adding to his age. Last week he was 74, then he's 77, now he's 80. Someone said he was 100. I mean, it's fucking ridiculous. Some of these propaganda merchants are a fucking embarrassment. As I say, those leaks are not really problematic apart from the Henry Cavill element, and I'm not sure I believe them. Now, the leaks could be true. Now, the person, one of these people's responsible for these leaks, as we know, Grace Randolph, who seems to think she knows everything about this film more than people who actually work on the fucking movie. So she doesn't know what she claims, but she reckons they've just finished a director's cut. That doesn't mean we're going to release a director's cut of the Flash movie. It means they're getting ready to, the director's cut will be shown to the studio. The director's cut's very important in the industry of a movie, and let me explain to you why. The studio will watch it. They don't like anything about it, they will send Andy and his team and the actors back to do reshoots. This is the moment where if Henry isn't in the movie, they may say, do you know what, Andy? We need to give Henry a call here. So that's interesting, but very interesting. So in a couple of weeks, and I think very shortly, they will watch the movie. I don't think the studio have seen the movie yet. That's one thing for sure. And they're the most important element here. So if they see the movie and they're unhappy, because don't forget, this movie is the most important DC live action movie in generations, because it's changing everything. And it's whether people accept this movie and its changes to this franchise, whether this franchise can continue. So they can make their changes, but if they don't stick with the audience, if nobody fucking cares or people get triggered, it isn't going to work. So the studio will see the director's cut, then they will decide whether Andy needs to go back and make relevant changes or make improvements. So this was one of the longest shoots in DCEU history, by the way. I think it went on for, what, 6 months? Films used to take about 6 months to shoot, but now with VFX and the technologies they use, they shoot normally for about 3.5 months. And it seems like, oh, it's not going to be a long movie. It's just the way they shoot. You could, I mean, Zack didn't take that long to shoot his version of Justice League either. And he was shooting the studio's version and his own. Remember him talking about shooting his own bullets. And doing that meant the Snyder Cut was possible. A 4-hour fucking beautiful DC comic book movie. One of the best comic book movies ever made. Let's not forget that. So lay off of Michael Keaton, because he's irrelevant to all of this. He's irrelevant to whether the Snyderverse is restored. Him being involved doesn't change anything about Ben Affleck being involved or not being involved. This is what I think about Ben Affleck. I actually think Ben Affleck is in Batgirl as well. I actually think that Ben Affleck will continue to cameo, as Henry Cavill will. I believe that Henry Cavill has got a small role in the Flash movie, not as stock footage, but Henry Cavill himself. These leaks may be even to point us in a different direction. But I do believe Henry and Ben will continue to cameo. Now, whether Henry gets his own movie, that's something totally different. And I think that's going to be in the remit of David Zaslav. No decisions have been made there. But in terms of cameos, I do believe that Henry is in The Flash properly. I believe he's in Black Adam, and I believe he's definitely in Shazam! Fury of the Gods. If nothing else, he will definitely be in Shazam! Fury of the Gods. But I believe he's in the other two movies as well. But I think the future for Ben Affleck and Henry Cavill at this point is cameos. And I think who knows what the future holds. So I don't think they're being deleted or cut out, and I don't think the Snyderverse is being deleted. As I said, as I've been saying for the past 2 days, I just feel they're moving the Snyderverse away from the central universe and giving it its own Earth, its own pocket universe. This is better for the fans, and this is better for Zack. So there's nothing to worry about. As I said the other day, it's up to you who you trust. Little old me with a very small platform, but seems to get a lot of things right. I've got my fair share of wrong as well, but so are the big platforms that you follow. Let's not forget that Grace Randolph isn't exactly got a 100% record, has she? None of us have who do this thing. But I believe that Henry and Ben will continue to be involved in cameos, and I expect Ben in the Batgirl movie as well. So, you know, I mean, there's lots of ways. Look, clearly J.K. Simmons is in the Batgirl movie for a reason. And as you say, there's no way that J.K. Simmons can be Michael Keaton's, you know, Commissioner Gordon. The guy's fucking younger than him, and a lot of people have pointed that out. So I believe Ben Affleck and Henry Cavill will continue to be in cameos, and at this moment in time, that's it. But we really should be grateful for at least that. Nothing's being cancelled, nothing's being deleted, but we are looking at a rebrand. We are looking at changes, and they could delete every DC Extended Universe movie. Now, last week I was talking about starting from Man of Steel and moving forward. I think that's probably what they're going to do. Man of Steel will probably be the only movie standing, because I think actually more people love Man of Steel than hate it. We'll have to see what happens. But don't worry too much about these leaks. You're going to hear a lot of half-truths and a lot of lies, because people like Grace Randolph now know that The Flash is 2022 Spider-Man No Way Home. So everyone's going to continue talking about it, but whatever people say about it, the intrigue level is going to make this film a lot of money. This is from the Hollywood Reporter. So they're talking about last year and this year and what everyone did. So they say DC turns the page. As for the distinguished competition at Warner Brothers, it was a small year for DC properties, yet a significant step forward as the studio turns the page to its next chapter. While The Suicide Squad didn't light up the box office with its simultaneous release in theatres and on HBO Max, it did prove to be a hit with critics and will surely develop a cult following. What it did do is get the DCEU back on track, I agree, for director-driven visions without massive studio interference. Introduce a bunch of new characters into the universe and hand James Gunn the reins to develop more DC projects, starting with Piecemaker on HBO Max in January. As for next year, DC looks to give Marvel a run for its money. I believe they will. With the Batman, DC League of Super Pets, Black Adam, The Flash, Batgirl, and Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. If anything, it looks the future of the DCEU will be less about narrative cohesiveness and more about multiverse as audiences are introduced to a greater number of DC stable characters. I don't agree with this, by the way. I do think we're going to look at narrative cohesiveness. The multiverse is basically going to be like the MCU. It's going to be a franchise. They're going to have an arc running through it. I think it's very, very exciting. So I do believe, although it's about the multiverse, it's also going to be about having, you know, films that are films, but they will have cameos and crossovers, and there's nothing wrong about that because that's what people want at the end of the day. Characters, two of which, Black Adam and Crypto, portrayed by Dwayne Johnson and the like, the MCU, the DCEU is also furthering its commitment to representation, both on screen and behind the cameras, with Batgirl, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, Supergirl and Blue Beetle. In theory, the DCEU should be able to get some new franchises going, maintain excitement for those already started, and rely on the always dependable allure of Batman. I agree. So it's very, very interesting what they're talking about, and they did tweet this. In 2022, DC and Warner Bros. Will release the Batman DC League of Super Pets, Black Adam, The Flash, Batgirl and Aquaman. I wasn't sure when Batgirl is releasing. I still don't know when Batgirl is releasing. It's very interesting because you could have a situation where you could have a DC movie in the cinema and Batgirl on HBO Max. That will be interesting. I can't see them doing it. For me personally, Batgirl should be on the big screen. I'm disappointed that Batgirl isn't on the big screen, but with 4 movies, you know, it's difficult to find the window to put them in. It's a packed year, and already a lot of studios are delaying movies to March and April. Luckily for the Batman, it doesn't come out to March, but don't be surprised if the Batman is delayed by a month or so. Let's see what happens. I hope not. But look, everyone, for me as an all-round DC fan, and that's what I've been ever since Superman the movie and Smallville, those are the projects that made me fall in love with DC as a whole. I think the comics are beautiful. I think the live-action iterations, there's fans, different fans of different live-action iterations, and that's great. I don't love all the live-action iterations, but I respect them, and I respect the people who love the stuff that I don't necessarily love as much as they do. But I love the Snyderverse. I love Smallville. I love most of the DC Extended Universe movies. So, and I mean, the Super Pets film's a bit of fun. It's a good idea. Let's do this. So, look, I'm excited for this year. I think it's great, and I can't wait till we get going in March with the Batman. Now, I really want to focus on Peacemaker because it's the first DC Extended Universe project of this year, and the reviews are coming out. We're very close to the release of this series. Unfortunately, I don't know where I'm going to be able to watch it, so watch this space and I'll let you know. Hopefully it pops up on Amazon Video, at least for me to rent or purchase. HBO Max's Peacemaker TV review by Angie Hahn. James Gunn's The Suicide Squad spin-off stars John Cena in the title role of a self-proclaimed superhero devoted to achieving peace at any cost, no matter how many people he has to kill to get it. In the first episode of Peacemaker, a character offers a snap judgment of Christopher Smith, aka Peacemaker, aka the title character played by John Cena. Sexist, probably racist, she says, but there's something else about him that's sad. That something sad proves to be the bruised heart of Peacemaker, beating from underneath, thick layers of juvenile humour and self-aware snark. Like so much else of creator James Gunn's work in the super something realm, the series is equally interested in provoking giggles at exploding heads or dick jokes as it is in writing wringing tears for its poor tragic weirdos. And while it more or less succeeds on both counts, it struggles to stand out in a sea of other superhero content doing much the same thing, often at the hands of Gunn himself. Well, listen, we live in an era of comparing everything and saying, what's the best ever? Peacemaker doesn't have to be the best ever. It just has to be something you enjoy while you watch it. The Suicide Squad movie by James isn't the greatest movie ever made, but while I'm watching it, I'm thinking, this is fucking brilliant. And, you know, I'm sure I'm going to have the same experience with Peacemaker. As established in In a previously on at the start of the first episode, Peacemaker picks up shortly after the events of 2021's The Suicide Squad, which left the character looking like an odd choice to lead his own spin-off. Peacemaker emerges from the film as, spoiler alert, an antagonist whose warped ethos is best summed up by his vow to have peace at any cost, no matter how many men, women and children he needs to kill to get it. He wasn't likeable, but he was interesting as a representation of a certain imperialist flavour of self-serving obliviousness. Peacemaker makes the character more likeable at the cost of making him less interesting. The character we meet at the start of the series is a troubled one. Although he insists to anyone who listen that he's doing just great, he's not. He's crying, he tells a concerned friend he's just exercising his face muscles. The turning point seems to have been his killing in the Suicide Squad of Rick Flag, Joel Kinnaman, whose last words echo through Peacemaker in repeated flashbacks. Peacemaker, what a joke, but the series traces his foundational trauma much further back to his childhood with a violently abusive father, a perfectly hateful Robert Patrick. Whatever Peacemaker's flaws, and this is a guy who spends the first episode calling a waitress sweet cheeks, hitting on one of his colleagues and spreading rumours about Aquaman, fuck his fish, he looks much more sympathetic when pitted against Patrick's Augie, a proud white supremacist who spits out slurs and snarls at his own son for letting himself get shot. The case for a Peacemaker redemption arc is never more convincing than in the pair's scenes together. Cena softens his chiselled face, an action figure posture to reveal the little boy under all that macho bluster. Aware he'll never win Dad's approval, but unable to stop himself from widening his eyes in search of signs he's finally found it. But so much of the material surrounding his journey feels half-hearted. A sense of obligation sets in any time the script returns to the overarching Save the World plotline, which involves a mysterious task force assigned to a mysterious mission labelled Project Butterfly. For mysterious reasons, the ensemble cast fill but don't transcend the characters' types that they've been assigned. The techie nerd, the lady badass and no-nonsense leader. Though Danielle Brooks does succeed in flooding the picture with warmth whenever she's on screen as a conflicted newbie. There's at least one major character whose relevance to either the plot or themes of the show remains a total head-scratcher to me after the 7 or 8 total episodes I've seen for review. Even the stuff Peacemaker does well feels like stuff that's been done before. Well, here's the thing, you're watching a Marvel Cinematic Universe that's done everything before. You don't criticise them. It seems like you have to think of something to put in the negative basket. Feels like stuff that's been done before and better. Besides Peacemaker himself, the most colourful character is his unhinged BFF vigilante Freddie Stormer. He's Deadpool with half the brain cells. I hate this comparison to Deadpool all the time. The 80s flavoured rock soundtrack and impassioned rants about same has shades of Thor Ragnarok or Gunn's own Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and Peacemaker's emotional beats feel of a piece with the Suicide Squad's own most sentimental tendencies. Without the maximalist scale, bleak commentary or individual quirks that made the film so intriguing. To be sure, something does not have to be original to be deeply charming. One of Peacemaker's most winning characters is Eagly, a pet eagle who's basically just a puppy dog in feathers, but by the time the characters are bickering about the Bernstein Bears Mandela effect in the 3rd episode, it feels like they're bickering because that's what characters in a show like this are supposed to do. Again, it's a contrived criticism. You know, you're supposed to do something because it's in the script, but it's part of the story. What do you want them to do? You know, it's weird. Rather than because it fits with any distinctive qualities about these people. Again, I think you're reaching here with your criticism. When someone starts a sentence with "No, you're not a dick vampire," it's possible to mouth the end of the sentence in real time. You're just a dick. Just such humour still counts as irreverent when it's been a staple of superhero comedies for at least the past 6 or 7 years. So what? Does a tragic backstory still feel like a revelation when it's the most reliable way of ginning up the sympathy for a flawed hero. Or maybe you don't like the sympathy for a flawed hero. Maybe you don't believe in compassion and forgiveness for people who realise what they've been and what they're doing is wrong. Maybe that's your problem and not actually the content that you've been watching. For all the show's finds towards edginess in colours, well within the lines laid out by its predecessor, that's not entirely to its detriment. It makes Peacemaker a comfort rather than a challenge. Too much familiarity over the course of a season, however, leads to a series that is easy not to mind watching instead of one that's hard to quit watching. In its quest to shed new light on the character who came out of his last movie looking dangerously close to outright villainy, Peacemaker loses too much of the darkness that made him compelling in the first place. So that's one review. So this is clearly from someone who didn't really think much of this. So let's go to another review. This is a more positive review because Casey Bloys of HBO Max actually shared it. A Peacemaker review, a rowdy and reflective take on DC's weirdest anti-hero. So let's look at this. I already know what this is going to be. I don't even need to read reviews, in detailed reviews. It's James Gunn. James Gunn does what he does. He's a one-trick pony. It's not a criticism of James. I love James. I've got a lot of time for James. I think he's great. He's fun. I'd love to be on a set with him. It would be amazing. But you know what you're going to get. And so anyone coming in expecting anything else is crazy. But a redemptive story for Peacemaker isn't a bad thing. And I actually think it's good. I liked Peacemaker in the Suicide Squad, but he didn't stick with me or anything. In fact, I'm still sore that James killed off Rick Flag. I still enjoyed the movie, but I didn't want him to die. Peacemaker review, a rowdy and reflective take on DC's weirdest anti-hero by Jenna Anderson of Comic Book. When I think about, let's get rid of this pop-up. When I think about the areas of DC Comics that are near and dear to my heart, the 1980s always stands out. Sure, the decade was filled with bombastic genre-defining crossover events and maxi-series, but the periphery of the publisher's outputs was a showcase of unparalleled amount of creativity in the 80s. It felt like any costume character could and realistically did get their own several issue miniseries or short-lived ongoing, expanding out their worlds and supporting casts for beyond fans' expectations. Among the massive roster of characters to get that treatment, in his case with a 4-issue miniseries, was Peacemaker, a Charlton Comics character from the 1960s who was even folded into the main DC universe post-Crisis on Infinite Earths. Those 4 issues took the goofy and violent characters and made him even goofier and more violent, all while crafting an origin story that was both reverential to old fans and accessible to new ones. So it's interesting if we go back to the original review, and I find this interesting because that person told us a lot about Peacemaker and his redemptive arc, but it didn't tell us much about the mission. So there's clearly spoilery stuff we're not supposed to know, and that excites me as well. HBO Max's Peacemaker TV series, which is written, created and partially directed by Suicide Squad's James Gunn, could not have been more of a similar sensibility, as it melds the best gimmicks of the 1960s and 1980s, both from its titular character's past and from Janier's storytelling overall. With a uniquely modern black comedy, while the end result isn't flawless, the first 7 episodes make up for it being violent, endearing and absurdly entertaining, all while showcasing the untapped potential of TV that is set within the main DC extended universe. Let's read that again, that's interesting. All while showcasing the untapped potential of TV that is set within the main DC extended universe. That's interesting. Set after the events of the Suicide Squad, Peacemaker follows the pacifist vigilante Christopher Smith, and yeah, basically I think it's just repeating what we've already read. After Gunn and Cena's previous collaboration of the Suicide Squad, a film that understood the poetic weirdness and beauty of superhero comics in a revolutionary way, some viewers will probably go into Peacemaker expecting 8 more installments of the same flavour. While the series is absolutely both narratively and thematically a sequel to the Suicide Squad, it quickly morphs into a viewing experience that is wholly unique. It's both thrilling and a little jarring watching Gunn's mile-a-minute Janier bending movie pacing transition over to television, as it allows for an unprecedented level of character exploration and development, and for the series' season-long plotlines to really simmer. That being said, the breadth of that storytelling occasionally has some downsides when binge watching the show in a close amount of time. Certain scenes or one-liners can come dangerously close to feeling drawn out or to similar to one another to an extent, but that's James Gunn. That's what I said. He's a one-trick pony, and a lot of people like that one-trick pony, including me. That does feel quintessentially like reading an 8-issue arc of an ongoing comic book, where you might get more out of processing the installments individually over a stretch of time as opposed to one giant binge, but those moments still prove to be more creatively interesting than a lot of the past decade of superhero television, and are vastly outweighed by moments that are brilliant and outrageous. What ends up being so brilliant and outrageous about Peacemaker, especially as an officially sanctioned adaptation of the character of one of two of the biggest fictional universes, is how it handles violence and profanity. Swear words are used so frequently that they basically double as punctuation marks, and it's basically impossible to count the jokes about sex and other taboo topics. While that aspect will surely affect some people's mileage on the show, it manages to feel gleefully organic with its world, and arguably leads to some of its standout moments. One scene early on in episode 6 is so hilariously constructed and acted, it's going to be living rent-free in my head for several months. And doesn't that mean that James has done a good job? The violence ends up being a different kind of visceral tone from the Suicide Squad's bloody deaths and hot dog style dismemberings, especially when juxtaposed with the mundane rural setting of the show, but the result is still impactful and feels like the neutral evolution from Gunn's days working in horror. All in all, Peacemaker would probably be the worst nightmare of anti-obscenity crusader Frederick Wertham, whose fight against the scandalous content of Golden Age comics. Oh yeah, now Frederick Wertham was a guy who believed that comics were the cause of violence of young people, and this went to court. He wanted to ban all comics, and this put DC in a lot of trouble. If you want to know more about this, you can look this up on the internet, but also on the documentary Look Up in the Sky, The Amazing Story of Superman. It's a very interesting thing to look at, whose fight against the scandalous content of Golden Age comics books forever impacted the industry. Even in our current age of boundary-pushing superhero satire, like The Boys in The Invincible, that's distinction that the series deserves to wear like a badge of honour. That being said, all of the gore and lewdness of Peacemaker is impossible to separate from its incredible strong emotional core, a detail that has become a bit of sort of staple of Gunn's various superhero outings. There's an inescapable silliness throughout the series, from the rapport between the characters to the mere concept of certain action sequences to the opening title sequences that needs to be seen to be believed. Even the comic characters incautiously name-dropped in conversations are some of the most bizarre and rewarding DC deep cuts possible. Wow! And will surely delight fans of the weirdest annals of publishers' canon. And like any good Gunn adaptation, the human-animal friendship between Smith and his pet Eagly will surely pull on the heartstrings. But at the same time, the show takes the inherent corniness of Peacemaker's world, his ridiculous costume, his American flag covered paraphernalia, and his unflinching adoration for the hair metal of the 80s, and dives into the sadness lurking underneath its surface. Almost from the jump, the show uses Smith as a case study for the flaws of toxic masculinity. We are in Hollywood, and that's the credo only gets stronger and more emotionally resonant as the season goes along. In the process, the show tackles the potential intersection between that toxic masculinity and white supremacy through a storyline that I never would have expected to see in a mainstream superhero adaptation. It feels impossible to imagine Peacemaker working or even existing without the cast that it has. While Cena already brilliantly made Smith his own in the Suicide Squad, the unembarrassed dimension he is able to bring to the series never ceases to be mesmerising to watch. It never ceases to be mesmerising to watch. In a way, the series feels like the unintentional culmination of Cena's entire career, as a wrestler, as an action movie star, as a comedic actor, and even as a commercial spokesman. Holland and Aggie, both of whom shine during their limited screen time in the Suicide Squad, get to flesh out their respective relatively obscure DC Comics characters in some truly fun ways. Iwuji and Brooks make pitch-perfect additions to the show's ragtag team, bringing stellar pathos to the show's most surprising characters, while Stromer's vigilante is characterized very differently from the straight-laced Adrian Chase that comic fans know. He sells that interpretation essentially every second he's on screen, all while leaving just enough room to potentially grow into that more grizzled version of himself. From the jump, HBO Max's Peacemaker has had a fair amount of riding on it. It's the follow-up to the masterpiece of a superhero film. It's the first TV show set officially within the DCEU, and it's centered around a character who is still far from a household name. Still, all of those elements seem to work in the series' favour, allowing for it to tell the action-packed, profane and bizarre story that perfectly suits its protagonist without any real expectations. Yeah, there are a small number of growing pains, but they are vastly outweighed by the creative and entertaining things that the series does right. Like the countless DC Comics solo series of the 1980s, Peacemaker proves an essential point about the DCEU, that when you showcase the weirdest possible fringes of a fictional universe, it helps the entire universe feel much bigger and more complete. So that is very, very interesting. I've read there for you two kind of reviews. One didn't seem to enjoy it that much, but found some good elements to it, and another one saying it's brilliant and comparing it to the mini comic series of the 80s as well. Reading both of those reviews, I think it's just going to be James Gunn. And if you like James Gunn, if you like Guardians, if you like his other work, if you like James Gunn's The Suicide Squad, this is an official sequel done in a small way. But I'm very excited to see it. This is the beginning of a historic year for DC live action, and we're going to experience this together on this channel. This has been the DCEU Daily. I'm Nick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends and your wives. Like, share, comment, please subscribe, hit the notification bell so you never miss this perfection, and I'll see you again tomorrow with even more DCEU Daily. Until then, goodbye, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen.